Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, John Knocklinger. I'm a men's divorce coach and a New Jersey divorce attorney and mediator. Today, we're going to discuss parenting after divorce and being the best father or mother you can be. My guest for this conversation is Rosemary Clark. She is an authorized language of listening parenting coach that equips parents with tools that get their kids listening without yelling, threats, or punishment. Warning to all of our listeners, I may have to use this podcast for a little coaching session myself, being the father of a 10, almost 11-year-old daughter who needs, and I need a lot of help with the yelling and punishment part of this. So let's see if Rosemary can help me a little bit today too. Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. And I start with that because, for all of us that have children, one of the hardest things to not do is to yell. And to punish and do all those things. But before we get into any of that, why don't you, I gave just a little bit of your bio, but why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and how you got into this area?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's funny that I'm in this area. I actually have a degree in music and opera singing. That's what my undergrad is in. But here I am. I work now as a parenting coach. And so, really, we could say it goes all the way back to my own childhood. I had an abusive childhood. I didn't realize it was abusive until I was in my 30s and had burnt out at work and ended up on a therapist's couch. And she asked, why was I working so many hours and working so hard? And I had never thought about the answer to that before. And I said, well, I'm just trying to prove I'm worth the space I take up in the world. And when I burned out, I'd only been married for 10 weeks. And I really thought that I knew, what kind of a parent I wanted to be. I had talked about it with my husband before we got married. But when I had 2 kids under 2, that's when the yelling started. And I knew that something was really wrong. I knew that things were not going the way that I wanted to because I was yelling at my babies. And so I started looking. I started looking for answers. I started looking for tools, not even knowing if the tools that I wanted existed. And when I stumbled on language of listening, it hit me, and I knew that this was it, that this was what was going to really allow me to parent my kids the way that I wanted to parent them in the way that I wish that I had been parented. So it allowed me to hold really firm boundaries in ways that left both me and my child feeling empowered instead of leaving us feeling disempowered. And also it allowed me to really draw out the strengths in my children, let them be their own individual selves. And that was another piece that was super, super important for me.
How many children do you have?
I have 2.
How old are they?
10 and 12 right now.
Oh, so I'm in the same boat as you. We're in the same age group, which is going to make this even more interesting. So talk about this language of learning. I'm sure most of our listeners have never heard of this before. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is and maybe who developed it? How long has it been around?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Sandra Blackard is the founder of Language of Listening. And she actually studied with Dr. Gary Landreth, who was the head of the American Play Therapy Association for a certain amount of time. But she worked with him because she was having trouble with her eldest daughter, who was just about to start school, and she was kind of freaking out. And what she went to Dr. Gary for was something called child-parent relationship therapy, which kind of teaches parents how to do play with their children at home in a way to connect with them, teaches them how to hold boundaries, and really, again, draws out the strengths in those children that get that time with their parents. And so she was able to learn that with him, but she added in some of her own knowledge and ability. And she was able to just add in, besides child-parent relationship therapy, all the things she was learning from Dr. Landreth, she added in some positive psychology, some transformational coaching, and she was able to distill it down to these 3 fantastic tools that work so beautifully with kids. And the thing that's really cool about Sandy and the language of listening is that it actually works for every relationship. So my husband's a therapist. He'll tell you that our marriage is better as a result of language of listening. I have many clients come to me after working with me and say, I'm having much better conversations with my spouse. Communication just kind of gets better because, again, I really feel like Sandy's cracked the code on how human beings work, but she did it through the lens of parenting. And so we get this wonderful, parenting model from her that really, really helps parenting be something that we can really dive into and enjoy and feel good about because we feel, confident ourselves.
So before somebody starts working with someone like you regarding being a parent, what do they need to do? What other things do they need to do? What I mean by that is, do they need to be working on themselves? Do they really need to do some self-exploration? kind of get to the bottom of why they are the way they are? Or is that part of what you do, is help them get in touch with themselves before they start working on being the best parent that they can be?
That's such a great question, because that's exactly how it is. When I did the training program to become an authorized coach, it was 2 years long. And it was the last third of the second year that Sandy started teaching us how to use the tools with ourselves. And that was the point when I started being able to use the tools to reparent myself, fill in the voids from that icky childhood that I had. And that's when things really, really started to click and connect for me as far as becoming the mom that I always wanted to be. It was great to have the tools, but then when I could use the tools with myself to really understand, what it looks like to have unconditional self-trust, what it looks like to build your own confidence, and really be able to identify and then honor your personal boundaries. Those pieces are so huge. And so that's actually what I start with when I work with people, is I actually start with helping them to identify and honor their boundaries.
Well, so how much of our parenting style and the way that we parent is related to how our parents parented us?
Yeah, it's 100% related, right? As we're growing, we're laying out mental pathways, new pathways in our brain to help us see how to understand things. And how do humans learn best? We learn through modeling, right? So whatever our parents kind of taught us to believe about ourselves, believe about kids, believe about how to treat other people, that's just brain wiring that gets laid. And we might like it and we might not like it. And so that's what we want to kind of focus on and pay attention to. Do you like, those ways of relating with other people? Does it feel like it's working for you? Do you feel good about yourself? Are you proud of yourself, after you've had difficult or even, positive interactions with your children? How are you feeling? Because again, going back to that unconditional self-trust, that's so, so important, because you're the best parent for your child. You just are. And, that's such an important piece for us to recognize. So whatever's going to kind of help you and strengthen you is what's really, really foundational there.
Wonderful. I think that, we don't think enough about our own parents. And I think most of us think, oh, I'm never going to be like my parents. I'm always going to do things completely different. And then once you get older, you realize you are a lot like your parents.
That brain wiring's in there. It just is.
Yeah, it's not your fault. It's just how it works, right?
Yeah.
Well, so that's interesting. This podcast is really about divorce and about what happens after divorces. And one of the things, obviously, that happens with children is now they're going to be in two different homes, instead of under one roof. And now you've got two parents who maybe need to work on their parenting simultaneously, because now you've got children that are going to one house where maybe a parent maybe is working on their parenting, and then they go to the other house where they're not. Can you see some pitfalls in that, in terms of how a child is processing these two households when you've got such different parenting that's going on in them?
Yeah, for sure. That situation is difficult on everybody. It's hard on everybody, for sure. The one thing is that kids are really good at getting to know people. They're really good at getting to know their parents. So even if they're being parented differently, let's say that you're not really enjoying the way, that you're not really happy about the way that your ex is parenting, the children, as long as you're this steady person in their life, you're going to have a huge effect on them, because the kids themselves too, they know what they like and what they dislike, what feels okay to them, what doesn't feel okay to them. And so even if there are some things going on in the other household that are not fantastic, if you're working on yourself and you're really working on that connection you have with your child, it's going to be hugely powerful for them. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is kids, they sort of look at which house is better for them in different perspectives. There are some children that will like one house because you've got a parent who has no rules, who just lets them do whatever they want. You can go to the pantry, get whatever snack you want. Oh yeah, you want Coke at 11 o'clock at night? Go have fun. You can be on your phone till 1 o'clock in the morning. And you go to the other house where there's a lot of rules and all these things. And sometimes, the children, depending on how old they are, they actually like the house where there's no rules. But but then there's other children who become mature and they realize that how it's better at the house where maybe the parent is more attentive to their needs. So I really think that that's one of the most difficult parts about parenting after divorce. Just before we even get into talking a little bit about some of the things I said in the intro about how to stop yelling and punishing and having a better relationship with your children and being a better parent. it's so difficult to just navigate the environment without the parenting, just the environment in the houses. And I'm just curious, how do you think somebody who is divorced and now is parenting children, and maybe during the marriage you had one parent that was working a lot and the other parent that was staying at home, so now the dynamics have completely shifted. Maybe the parent that was at home is now having to get a job and work, because that happens a lot post-divorce. What are some of the steps you think someone should take, that is the parent that wants to become a better parent, to sort of help or talk to the other parent to also get on board with this? Because I mean, if you're not consistent with children, there can be other issues. I know you just said if you're the consistent parent, it'll have a good impact. But let's say you're the consistent parent that only has, 2 nights a week with the kids, something like that. I know it's a long question, but I hope you get where I'm going with this. It's really, because this is the hardest part of co-parenting post-divorce, is just the different environments these children are being exposed to.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're asking about what can the communication look like between the two parents? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, language of listening really teaches us how to communicate. I mean, if you look at the name, language of listening, right? It's like how to speak in order to listen, but we listen to understand. One of the premises from language of listening talks about, like, people will continue to communicate until they're understood. And so being able to really understand where the other person's coming from. Now, when we're talking about, perhaps two adults who were in a relationship, they're still in a relationship because they're co-parents. One of the things that really improved in my marriage as a result of language of listening is that language of listening allowed the enmeshment to fall away. And enmeshment is really when your emotions are kind of wrapped up in a very unhealthy way. I kind of think about it like a spider's web. We can get caught in the spider's web where we feel like the other person's emotions are, tied up in our emotions, or we have to feel a certain way when the other person's feeling a certain way. And, it can get really, really icky. And so when the enmeshment can go away and we can kind of be like our own person, and we start understanding, like, again, what I said before about identifying and honoring our own boundaries, it becomes really easy to start to then have conversations with the other person where you are offering the same respect that you give yourself about, identifying and honoring their boundaries. And even if you have different boundaries, that's fine. When we're speaking with people, language of listening teaches that really what you want to do to get to a place of agreement is start on something that's very basic that you can both agree on, which is usually just the fact that you can respect each other, that you want to have respect be a part of that relationship. You need to be able to respect the other person that you're parenting with. Hopefully you're able to. And I'm not saying that, it's your fault if you can't. I'm just saying that hopefully it's a situation where, both people can find some level of agreement, some level of respect, or sometimes the agreement is just, we both want the healthiest environment possible for our child in the midst of this situation, and so being able to really, again, honor yourself, learning how to honor yourself. In our childhoods, typically what happened, because we were, almost all of us raised with that reward and punishment, kind of model, what ends up happening is that we start to set aside our connection to our preferences, to our likes and dislikes. Those things are our boundaries, and they're connected to our identity. And instead of being really aware of our own boundaries, we get really aware of our parents or our caregivers' boundaries, their identities, and we start to take those things on instead of having our own. So that idea of being able to reparent yourself, pick up your identity, and really live from that place is huge. Because again, that's one of the things that happens is, like, you have this deep respect for your own identity, your own boundaries, and then you can give it to everybody else. And the way that you converse with people really changes.
Reparenting yourself. That's an interesting concept. I've never heard of that before.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, that's interesting. Children are, they're little gossipers, right? So you're going to, whenever you're in two separate houses, one of the other things that always happens is that children will come and tell you what the other parent is doing or not doing, and trying to get your help to change what's going on in the other house. It could be the food that's there. It could be the bedtime. It could be, the fact that they don't go do anything, or maybe they don't like their bed, whatever the case is. What kind of role should you play as a parent when you're in the split environment, maybe even an intact family, and you've got your child coming to you and basically complaining about their other parent and what that other parent is or is not doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough, right? And I think sometimes, when two people are together and they have a child, sometimes, and I'm speaking from my own personal experience here, right? Like, so for me, in my situation, I gave birth to my children. And so I feel like I have a little bit more ownership over them than my husband. And that's simply not fair. He's equally the parent that I am. He just is. Even though I carried them for 9 months and gave birth to them and all that stuff, he's equally the parent. And this is a lot of what I have to kind of reiterate to parents who are feeling very frustrated when they are, separated and they're co-parenting and whatnot. We do really need to give trust to that other person. If there's something abusive going on, my goodness, that has to change. Somebody needs to interfere. Absolutely. Right. But when it comes to, you not liking what the other person's doing, you can have a conversation with them. And again, I mean, maybe, John, one of the things we can do is dive into how do you identify your boundaries. I'm happy to share, that first activity that I get my clients to do. But really, we have to start from this place of they are equally as much a parent of this child as I am, and kind of let them play their own role in their own household, because we're simply not sharing a household with them anymore. Or you're talking about people that we are sharing a household with, right? And at the same time, when you can really speak about your boundaries in a very clear way. So a big problem with boundaries is this whole idea of like, we do really connect with the emotions of the people around us. And so if I come, to my children, to my husband, to anybody, and I'm trying to hold a boundary, but I feel a lot of drama around even the fact that I have this boundary. I got questions like, is this boundary okay? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm feeling really angry and frustrated. Or the big one for me is when I was a child, I saw adults who held boundaries, and those adults were mean and controlling when they held boundaries. And so I thought you had to be mean and controlling when you hold boundaries. My whole point is when you come to somebody else to hold a boundary or talk about a boundary with those emotions that are they could be spilling out all over the place. They could just be kind of dripping, but the other person is going to pick up on them subconsciously. And what you're giving when you're holding your emotions. So if you're giving frustration and disconnection, that's what you're probably going to get back. And the person's not even probably going to know why. They don't recognize they've got these mirror neurons in their brain, which is causing them to, feel similarly. And I really believe that our nervous systems connect with other people too. If you think about when you catch a yawn from somebody, it's the thing that happens, right? And so it's that idea of, there's more connection there maybe than we know that we're aware of. And, for us to be able to feel really calm about our boundaries and not have drama around them, it's really going to make a big difference when we go and speak to that other person. Kind of about what's going on. And again, coming with respect, understanding first and foremost that they are equally a parent as you are, when you can meet on a common ground, instead of you coming and saying, I know better than you, and that kind of an idea, or I'm really angry with you, it's just like, well, this situation happened. That must have been really frustrating for you. Can you tell me what you hoped to get out of that situation? Can you tell me what was it that you wanted? Our wants are really important and connected to our identity as well. So if we can really help that other person connect with what they wanted and make it okay that they wanted what they wanted, then perhaps we can help them get to that place in a way that we feel better about. And it's probably going to be a way that they feel better about too. Because we all know, like you said at the beginning, right? Like the yelling, the punishments, that's usually stuff that we don't like, but we feel like there's no other choice. Right. So when we can have a conversation about, well, here are some other choices that are available in that situation to still get to that endpoint. Let's talk about those. That's, a very different conversation.
Yeah. Having a conversation with the other parent can be very difficult for most people, because most people aren't used to talking the way that you were just talking,
right?
Because they haven't been trained. Like it's very difficult to not say it in a way that doesn't come across, condescending or come across in a really intensely negative way. It's very difficult. But I'm really wondering about boundaries, because I think a lot of people aren't even consciously aware of what their own boundaries are.
Yeah.
How do you get someone in touch with that and recognize, what it is that they hold to be a boundary, and even more than that, what do they actually want? Because you also were talking about that. How do you get someone in touch with that?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say before I share that is just I want people to get in their head, there's a difference between boundaries and rules. Those are different things. And I'll talk about that after I share the activity. So the activity that I learned from language of listening that I get all my clients to do right at the very beginning, so the first thing I get them to do is I get them to sit down on their own for about 20 or 30 minutes and make a list of everything that they can think of that they like and everything that they can think of that they dislike. Because we do lose connection to those things, and those things truly are our boundaries. And when we start to reconnect with our likes and dislikes, we start to reconnect with our identity, and we start to really have just a better relationship with ourselves so that we can start to honor that. And so again, that helps to start to remove that drama that I was talking about around our boundaries. Like, like the first time I did this, sit down and did my likes and dislikes list, the first thing I wrote was, I love red licorice. I just think Twizzlers are like so delicious. And then that made me think of red wine, which made me think about spending time with my husband. Usually there's this neat little path that our brains will go down when we're doing our likes and dislikes list. But like, I love red licorice. It's just the way things are. Nobody can convince me that red licorice is disgusting and tastes gross, because for me, it's like my favorite food. And so you start to kind of have this like basic understanding of like, I just like this thing. Like, it's just a thing that I like, or things that you don't like. I didn't really like spending holidays with my family, sadly, because it just was a very uncomfortable kind of toxic environment. And I never really sat down and let myself explore that and accept it and understand it. And like, there's just so much less drama where I'm like, oh, like, I don't like being around them. It doesn't allow me to enjoy my holiday, so that opens up a possibility, right? That, how can I enjoy my holidays? Well, maybe it doesn't include spending as much time or any time with my family of origin, and again, you can see, I don't have any drama about that. Whereas I probably did for many, many years, had a lot of drama about how uncomfortable it was to be around my family during the times, and how much I didn't enjoy, holidays and get-togethers. So that's really what you can do to get started. And then, as you go throughout your day and things happen and you see that you have a response to it, the way that you start to rewire your brain, because remember we talked about, our brains just get wired the way they get wired in childhood, according to the experiences that we have. What you can do is, as you go throughout your day, and something happens, you can just acknowledge to yourself whether you liked it or you disliked it. Because we get really stuck in what's right and wrong, or like what so-and-so would say, or what society would say, right? And right now, I just want to give everybody permission to like not be afraid to challenge what society has taught you to believe about yourself and believe about your kids, because many of those beliefs are very harmful and not helpful at all. So it's okay for you, again, to get grounded in that unconditional self-trust. But what it looks like when you start to, say to yourself, validate in yourself what you like and what you dislike. Let's say that you knock a glass on the floor and it breaks. So what we do is we use one of the tools from language of listening. There's only 3 tools. This is the first one. It's called Say What You See. And you just reflect back anything you see the other person saying, doing, thinking, or feeling. But this is self-coaching. This is using the tools with yourself. So anything that you see happen, or anything that you see, yourself saying, doing, or thinking, or feeling. So you knock a glass on the floor and it breaks, and you can say, a glass fell on the floor and it broke. We'll keep it really objective, right? Not, it was all your fault and you're a horrible person, right? But a glass fell on the floor and it broke, and you didn't like that. That's it. You just simply start saying things like that to yourself, just to get grounded in knowledge of who you are and what you like and what you dislike, what your preferences are. And you know what? Maybe that glass fell on the floor and it broke, and you actually did like it, because crazy Aunt Martha gave you that glass years ago, and you hate it and you think it's the ugliest thing in the world, and you've always wanted to get rid of it. And now you can, because it's broken, and you don't have to have any guilt or any drama around that. And actually you're happy that the glass broke. Like the possibilities there are fine. They're perfectly okay. And so then the other piece that I wanted to talk about was the difference between boundaries and rules. So your boundaries live inside of you, and usually they don't change. They just are what they are. We can get deeper in boundaries. Sometimes there's a boundary that looks like a boundary, but actually there's a deeper like or dislike there. That's more kind of pure. But when it comes to boundaries and rules, your boundaries are, again, they live inside of you, and rules are the way that you express, the ways that other people can respect your boundaries. So an example is, in our house, I really hate it. I don't like it when there's Sharpie marker on my walls, on my furniture. And so I came up with 2 rules for my kids when they were younger, and this was a problem. One rule was that if they found a Sharpie marker, they had to bring it to an adult. And the other rule was that Sharpie markers are for paper. Now, maybe Sarah down the road is like, I hate Sharpie markers. I have the same boundary as Rose. I don't like Sharpie markers on my wall and on my furniture. But my rule is going to be, there's no Sharpie markers in the house. you see how boundaries can be the same, but rules can be different? And so there's that idea of, your boundaries are yours. They can stay intact. Rules, if your children are having a hard time following them, that's kind of where you have the discussion is around the rules.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that anyone listening to this probably is thinking, because I know I'm thinking, is how does learning your boundaries, how does that lead to you becoming a better parent? I mean, while you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that when I'm on the phone, the one thing that I cannot stand is when someone's making noise around me, like especially if I'm in my own office and I'm not just walking through the house. And that does lead to yelling sometimes, muting and yelling. And, it's things like that. I mean, and a lot of times it's the aforementioned daughter of mine who is the one that is making the noise. But I'm really wondering, like, the connective tissue between figuring out what you like, what you don't like, what your boundaries are that leads to the rules that you're instituting in your house. What is the connection between all of that and actually the work of learning to be a better parent to your children?
Yeah. So your example is a fantastic one, actually, because you're talking about when you're talking on the phone and people are making noise. And there's really, there's a few things that can happen there. There's a few possibilities. You just simply leave the room and you go find a quiet place. But you said it often happens when you're in your office. Where else are you going to go? Your office is your space, right? And so then the options are the other person is quiet or the other person leaves, right? Or you just keep putting up with it. I guess there's that option too, right? But that's just not holding your boundary. That's fawning, and we're not so fond of fawning, right? Mm-hmm. So, in that moment, I think really, first off, just being okay with, like, I just don't like this. Like, there's something really freeing. Once you start to apply this to your life, you'll see what I mean. There's something just really freeing where you're just like, oh, I don't like this. There's no drama about that. And I can just go ahead and do something about the fact that I don't like this situation. So that goes back to what I was saying before, whereas like the emotion that you're bringing to that person, right? The feelings that you have. So something that could be happening with you in that moment, this is how I would feel if I was in my own office and somebody knew that I'm on the phone and I don't like noise when I'm on the phone and they're making noise, I would probably start to feel powerless. That's probably what would happen. And actually the way that I communicate in that moment would probably start to communicate powerlessness to the other person, who would then also feel powerless. So then what we've got is two people that need to meet their need for power, because humans absolutely have to act to meet their need for power when they're feeling powerless. And this is why we yell. I mean, we yell because we're feeling powerless, and we yell because we just want to be heard. That's it. You just want somebody to listen and hear what you have to say and respect it. That's it. So there doesn't even have to be a lot of drama around yelling. And you can go, I don't like yelling. And then you can take that a step further, John, and this part's really cool. Remember I said your likes and dislikes are connected to your identity. If you don't like yelling at your child, then that's not who you really are. And that's a really cool thought. I'm doing something I actually don't like yelling at my child. And that's not who I am. So how can I bring my authentic self into this moment, into this situation, But what we could do is use this to transition into how do you actually use the language of listening tools? How does this actually work? Applying these boundaries in these situations. How can I leave my child feeling, empowered, and leave myself feeling empowered as well? Would you like to do that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Awesome. So with language of listening, again, we've already talked about the likes and dislikes. And basically there's just two categories of behavior when your kids are doing something, right? It's either behavior you like that you'd like more of, or it's behavior that you don't like that you would like to have it change, right? So with language of listening, when we're talking about behaviors, one of the premises that we have, and I'll just stop here and let you know, language of listening has a premise attached to each of the three tools. And really, to me, it's about the premise. It's about the belief. It's giving us new things to believe about our kids, to believe about ourselves. It's going to inform our parenting. What the tools do is they give us the opportunity to practice that new belief over and over again till we've got that new brain wiring in place, and it just takes over on its own. And so one of the premises says that everything children do and say, sorry, that's the wrong one. That's the first one. What I want to start with, all behaviors are driven by three healthy needs: experience, connection, and power. So all behaviors are driven by one of or a combination of those three healthy needs. It doesn't mean that all behavior is healthy behavior, or it doesn't mean that all behaviors are behaviors that you like. Okay. But what we do is we can go back then to, but the child is just trying to meet a need. And if we can identify which need they're trying to meet, then we can hold a boundary around how they meet that need. So we don't hold boundaries around the emotions our kids express. We hold boundaries maybe around the way they express those emotions. We don't hold boundaries around which need our child needs to meet in a moment, because it's just a need. It's just showing up. It's just what it is to be human, you know. But we can hold boundaries around the way that child meets their needs. So again, coming at it coming at it from that different way of thinking is like, okay, this child is just meeting a need, but I don't like the way they're meeting that need. How can I support them to find a new way to meet the need that feels satisfying for them and stays inside my boundaries? Because kids actually, they're always meeting their own needs. They are. We don't have to get in there and meet their needs for them. But what we do, our job is to create that box. It's almost like putting a baby in a playpen with a bunch of toys. You know, like we create the box. It's the playpen for them to play in, and they can play with those toys, you know, in most any way they want, as long as they're not like, you know, hitting some other kid in the head if there's two kids in the playpen, right? But the point is that it really is our job to create that box, and then our kids are going to meet their needs. And so when we see our child doing something we don't like, let's use your example of, you know, your daughter's making noise when you're on the phone, you've muted, you know, and you're going to have a conversation with her. Like, you know, why would a great kid stand in your office with you? This is us going back to like what their intention is, right? The intentions are always good. That's what I kind of meant to say too about all behaviors are driven by 3 healthy needs. There's always a good intention in there. So, you know, what of the 3 healthy needs might you be trying to meet? Why would a great kid be in your office making noise when you're on the phone? Probably wants to meet her need for connection, probably feeling a little lonely, right? And in that moment, you might not be available. You aren't available to meet her need for connection. You're on the phone. But if you can acknowledge to her that's what's going on, like, hey, like you're talking, I'm on the phone, right? And I need quiet in here when I'm on the phone. Must be some way that we can stay connected, you know, while I'm on the phone. So she could draw you a picture. Maybe you're on your office phone and you've got your cell phone and you can hand it to her and say, go in the other room and record a message for me. And I'll listen to it as soon as I get off the phone, or go in the other room and write me a note and, you know, slide it under my door. Or like, there's got to be some way for her to meet her need for connection that's going to work for you. And if there's not in that moment, then assuring her that you're going to come and find her after you're done on the phone, maybe what she needs, maybe all she needs in order to be able to move on and, you know, not have her need for connection in that moment in the way that she's trying to get it met. Does that make sense?
It does. And, it's fascinating to listen to this. I was actually just thinking about all of the common things that upset parents, that, you know, because one of the things I like to do when I'm speaking to someone with so much knowledge like you is to try to bring in like real life examples so we can kind of, you know, bring this to someone who maybe isn't used to hearing someone speak quite the way you do. And I was thinking of like, what are some of the common things that parents routinely get upset about? You know, a child hasn't gone to bed when they're supposed to go to bed, so you get upset. A child doesn't wake up when they're supposed to wake up, so maybe you yell at them. Children that won't eat anything, and you get frustrated that they won't eat more foods than, you know, let's say chicken nuggets and mac and cheese. You know, or, you know, a child that has a phone and, you know, you have to say their name 5 times before they look up from the phone to respond to you. I'm just bringing up all these sort of real life examples because I think all of these are exactly related to what you've been talking about. But I think one of the hardest things to do for most people is to conceptualize what the child's need could possibly be in these situations. Because I think a lot of us go to a very simplistic place, but a lot of times it's probably, is it deeper sometimes than we think it is, the need that they're trying to exercise? For example, let's use the food, because I think this is something that parents routinely get upset about. What kind of need would a child be exercising when they have the pickiness, when it surrounds, you know, eating, let's say?
Oh, John, you picked the perfect example, because this is like something that's been going on in our house for a little while now. And so, right. And like all those examples that you gave, like all I could think of was like every single one of them was like, I'd be feeling so powerless. I'd be feeling so powerless. I'd be feeling so powerless as a parent trying to deal with all these things. Right. And so, I mean, there's a few things to kind of look at here. And so in our house, the specific situation is like, it really is a message. So the first premise from language of listening, which is one I started saying by mistake before, is everything children do and say is communication, and they must continue to communicate until they are heard. So a child who's like not eating all the foods that you're wishing that they would eat, there could, and again, it's going to vary. You need to get to know your child, and sometimes it's, trial and error. But just looking at the communication that might be there, a lot of kids who are having trouble eating different foods, it can be because there's a deeper sensitivity there, right? So my daughter doesn't just have a sensitivity to the foods that she eats, the flavor, the texture. She's got a major sensitivity to clothes, right? And so there's this whole like sensitivity issue in her. And so that idea of like getting upset over and over again. So what happened with us was that my husband and I started getting very anxious about the fact that our child wasn't eating the food that we'd like her to eat. And so then we just started pouring out all this anxiety over her. And so she started getting all this anxiety over supper time, which just made the meals even more difficult, right? And so in those moments, again, recognizing what need they're meeting, sometimes it can be about the communication that's getting through too, and just recognizing like, okay, so for example, my daughter is now in occupational therapy, which has been helping her with sensitivity, which has been fantastic, right? Which means I can actually relax. I can relax just knowing like, this is not about my parenting. This is not a situation. And we do this all the time as parents, right? We look at a situation and we go, oh no, what's this going to look like next week, next year, in 10 years? It's going to be a major disaster. And we're making our decisions from that place instead of just the place of, okay, what's my boundary? My boundary around food with my child is just that she's healthy, that she's getting the nutrients that she needs. Does that mean that we brought in some multivitamins and iron pills? Oh, heck yes, it does. Right? Does that mean that we've taken direction from the OT and learned how to introduce new foods with our child? Oh, heck yes, it does. Right? And I can do those things with a lot of calmness because I'm accepting them. So that's kind of part of the idea too, is like accepting that your child is just communicating something is really, really huge, and just making it be okay. It's okay that she's sensitive. Does it make things hard sometimes? Oh yes, it really does. It complicates things, and it's just who she is, right? So being able to accept that. And at the same time, so how can I get my boundary in there? My boundary just being that, what is it that I want? You talked about getting to our wants, right? Our wants are actually, they're an escalation of our likes and dislikes. And they're an escalation in the wants are how we act on our likes and dislikes. And that can vary for people too, as well. I remember during my training, one of the ladies was teaching about how she really likes puppies. She said, I really, really love puppies, but my want is not to have one. That's not the way she expresses her want, because she's like, I don't want the piddles and I don't want the, whatever the things that she didn't want around the puppy. But the way that she acted on her like was to go to dog parks and pet other people's puppies and get to meet other people's puppies, and that's how she acted on her boundaries. So there's different ways that we can, express our boundaries or act on our boundaries. So, with my child, again, the way that I do it is I find a way to introduce new foods, and I find a way to, remove the sugar, because the sugar is obviously, sugar gives us a form of energy, that can make us feel like we're not as hungry or whatever. And again, I'm able to do those things without the drama behind them that I used to have. When I was still learning language of listening, because there used to be a lot of drama. And again, those feelings of powerlessness. Now, what can parents do when they're feeling powerless? The very first thing that you can do actually is use the tools with yourself to really get to that place of, what do I want in this moment? And the best way to do that is to use that first tool from language of listening, say what you see. So again, that belief, that premise that goes with the say what you see is that everything children do and say is communication. But really, everything we all do and say is communication. So this could be about your own behavior, could be about your child's behavior. But if you get yourself in the bathroom, lock the door, look at yourself in the mirror, and start using that say what you see with yourself, and you make it okay that you feel really frustrated that your child's not eating their food, or you make it really okay that you're frustrated they won't go to bed or whatever. Your feelings are equally as valid and equally as important, and they're just giving you messages about what you like and what you dislike and about what you want. And like I said, many times in our childhood, we learn to set those things aside and not have connection to them. So this is why I say the tools are about reparenting ourselves, because they're really about giving us connection to our identity back and not having drama over that identity, being okay with ourselves, having unconditional self-trust. So you get in the bathroom and you're just saying, you're so frustrated. You want to blow your stack. You can't believe she's just refusing to eat anything but chicken nuggets. She had chicken nuggets for lunch. She had them for supper last night. You're not giving them to her again. Get all that frustration out until you have a physical reaction. And that physical reaction is either you're nodding because you really, really got to the bottom of how you're thinking and feeling. Or you cry. Sometimes people will cry because they've really hit on a wound or something that's, really a really deep thing inside of them. Once you've got that physical reaction, that's when you move into what do I actually want in this situation. So for example, the parent, again, the eating thing is usually you just want your child to be healthy and you probably want peaceful meal times. The parent who has asked their child 10 times politely to get their shoes on because they have to go get the other younger kids ready, and that child is still, on their phone and they still haven't put their shoes on, right? What does that parent actually want? Do they know? Well, they want their kid to put their freaking shoes on, but long-term, what do they want? They probably want their child to put their shoes on the first time the parent asks. Right? But when do we ever stop to really understand that's what we want? Because if the child isn't doing that, then they're lacking a life skill. Then we just use our language of listening tools to come in and teach that life skill to that child, again, from a very accepting place. And then that child has the life skill and away you go. It really can be that simple.
I think a lot of people listening to this might have been under the illusion that, getting upset at their child for any of the things that we've been talking about was more related to just your level of stress that day or that in that moment, rather than, that you need to reparent yourself and sort of learn how to communicate with your child better. I mean, I know that, a lot of times I won't yell except when I'm already stressed about something else. But I think what this conversation is leading me to understand that it's just because those issues, those parenting issues, my boundaries, the way that my child has been reacting bubbles up and it's like a magnifying glass is on it because of the level of stress that's going on. Because I think a lot of people probably think, well, I only yell at my kids whenever I'm really stressed out. I only yell at my kids whenever they really piss me off. Because we all give ourselves an excuse for why we just did what we did. And I hope everyone listening is starting to understand, and you may not understand everything that's been discussed today because I'm still processing it, but you need to, it seems to me that the one takeaway for sure is that none of us are bad parents, that there is a way to help yourself and your child to have a better relationship. And I really, because that was the first thing I was thinking of whenever I first started listening to you today was, okay, well, how much of this is just situational versus, systemic issues? And it sounds like most of it probably is more systemic and it just comes across situationally. Is that a good way of looking at it?
You nailed it, John. Yeah.
Okay. And which is great because I've never heard of this before we talked today. So I'm listening just like everyone else listening to the way you're describing it. I'm a little curious what you think, and we haven't really touched on this specifically, but the person who's been co-parenting in this intact relationship, and I'm going to use the father. I mean, this is pretty much who I'm talking about in this particular circumstance, is now off on their own, single parent, shocked to the system.
Yes.
All right. Obviously everything you've been talking about is applicable to that person, but it's even more extreme because perhaps the other parent was the one really doing most of that, all the parenting that we've been talking about, the one getting the food ready, making sure the kids are ready, to get out in the morning, making them take their showers, brush their teeth. They were doing all those things. And now all of a sudden, bam, it's like smack across the face. You're a single parent now, and now you've got to do all those things. So maybe you haven't even really assessed what your boundaries are because you were never the one that was having to do any, to be involved in a lot of these day-to-day things. What kind of advice do you have for someone like that?
Yeah. Well, it's a real time of self-discovery. Anytime you're parenting, anytime you're even just, for teachers working with kids, there's a lot of self-discovery that happens and goes on. So again, first off, I just want to, go back to what you were saying, calling them systemic issues, but really you're okay where you are. And you're an important player in this, and what I mean by that is it's good for you to be able to feel good about yourself. It's good for you to acknowledge your own emotions, so recognize again that this is a shock. Like you said, John, this is a shock to the system, and that's okay. It's okay that it's a shock. It's okay if it feels hard. That acceptance that comes in One of a premise of language of listening, which is like the overarching premise, says that like all growth comes through acceptance. Like once we accept where we are, and that's very like Carl Rogers, if you're into psychology, like really that understanding of like, once you accept where you are, that's when you can really get connected with yourself, accept yourself, and then start to make the changes that are going to reflect who you are and that you're going to feel really good about, that you're going to feel really proud about. The way that I talk about it or express it is when it's okay to have a problem, it's okay to go ahead and solve that problem. Or when it's okay to feel how you're feeling, right? It's okay to act on that feeling, because our feelings are all about adapting. That's really the purpose of emotions. They're just there to help us to adapt to the situation that we find ourselves in. So many times we've been taught to stuff our emotions in this society. We've been taught to stuff, don't show it, don't pay attention to it, shut it away. We're not all that great at adapting. We're not all that great at bringing who we are as an individual. And like I said before, you are the best parent for your child, right? And this opportunity to become a parent is huge. I remember my husband saying to me one day, he was like, I actually needed you to leave me alone with the girls. Like we're still together and we've been co-parenting in the same house, but he needed time. He needed time where I wasn't looking over his shoulder, telling him everything he was doing wrong. So really taking this time to start to know better who you are and like start to appreciate yourself. Like one of the things I remember saying in some of the coaches calls, again, in the end of that second year, as I came into the coaching call to share with the other people in the class with me, I just said, I think I'm actually starting to like myself. Like this whole idea of like likes and dislikes and how much I had shoved myself aside after a very difficult childhood. Like it was such a fun new experience to start to really like myself and love myself. And the more I was able to do that, the really cool thing that happened was the more I was able to let in my kids' love and really have a deeper connection with them when I was able to just like create a deeper connection inside myself with myself.
Fascinating. Well, I got to tell you, Rose, I think a lot of people really could use your help. I'm just gonna say it. Myself included, not going to lie. But how, like, what's the first step of someone working with you? How do you know if really you're the best person to work with for what someone's going through? Like, how do they identify that they need you, I guess is a way of putting it.
Yeah. So one of that's something that I do together with people that are looking for, a parenting coach. And so I do offer free consultation calls. They last about 45 minutes or an hour each. And people can just, sign up and have a Zoom call with me. And we really work through like, what is it? What's going on? First off, right? What's happening? What is it that you want? How connected are you to your wants? How do you feel about what did you like? What did you dislike about the way you were parented? We kind of talk about those different things and really just get a feel for, what's going on. Because there are some situations, I'm not a psychologist. There are some situations that, somebody might need different help. And I'm happy to let people know, that perhaps the situation they're dealing with doesn't really fit. And then I would also encourage somebody like, look inside. Did you like the things that we talked about? Right? Does this parenting model feel like it's something you like? And if it's something that you dislike, then let's honor that. And it doesn't feel like it fits for you. And that's okay. Because it's just, we accept who you are. We accept your likes. We accept your dislikes. And so really that idea of just kind of honoring where you are, honoring what you want, and just seeing if it feels like a good fit. Yeah.
Well, I feel like I almost just had a consultation with you in this podcast. So that's great. I mean, a free consultation to sort of go through and see whether or not it's something that you would want to do. I mean, that's great. I mean, that's wonderful that you offer that to people. So if someone would like to take advantage of that, how do they contact you? Give us some more information.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, they can go to my website, which is lovethewayouparent.com, and then just click on work with me. And that will take you to a link where you can automatically book a free call with me just that way. Or they can email me at lovethewayouparent@gmail.com. That's a great way to get in touch with me too. So either way works. Yeah.
Love the Way You Parent. Yeah. I love that. It's a great website and it really encapsulates everything that you stand for and everything that you try to do and help people with. And so I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here today. This was a great conversation and one I hope to continue with you offline.
Oh, thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.